Here's a quick look into today's episode.
So my name is Jaime Martinez. I served in the Army for 26 years, former soldier and currently a leader in the veteran advocacy space. And I was medically retired in 2010 after beating two aggressive, life-threatening cancers. I had been diagnosed with a head and neck cancer, and that was due to toxin exposures, as well as a medullary thyroid carcinoma. Just as I was about to assume battalion command and I would say that transition never ends. Today, as of this past year in late October, I'm fighting a third cancer in as many years. And it's a tough fight because of the other physical issues, but most importantly, the challenges of my mental health and how the diagnosis was layered into a final reality that I needed to immediately address my mental health in order to continue to build resiliency and live a better life after I beat this cancer. At the end of the day, while I may be in crisis, I'm very hopeful as I move forward over these next few months that the outcome will help have me healthier and back online where I need to be so I can get back. As I continue to work at the corporate level, build this program while I fight cancer and deal with my mental health challenges and come out and be able to answer that question on the back end, which is, what do you do with the gift of life?
Hey folks, welcome to Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. Today's episode is with Jaime Martinez. Our conversation centers around dealing with crisis and how we attempt to answer the question, what do you do with the gift of life? We'll go in depth into Jaime's story, where he's extremely honest and vulnerable about the challenges, the low times, as well as the successes and great times. From Army challenges to life challenges, mental health, and a vision for helping soldiers as they transition out of the service. Charles Dickens puts it best, from A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was a season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. So without giving away any more, let's get on to the conversation with Jaime Martinez.
Dangerous times, don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.
Jaime, I'm super excited to do this. I was really fired up when you called me a few weeks ago because I have always looked up to you as somebody that was an example on what the leadership that I wanted to be like. We all have our flaws. We all have our things that aren't perfect. But there was some things about you that stood out to me when I was a junior officer. And the example I give is when you were the battalion XO and I was a company XO. And I'll never forget it. I remember sitting in your office and there was going to be a big inspection down in the motor pool. And we were paratroopers, right? One Panther, we don't have a huge motor pool, but we had a motor pool. And the inspection was going to be down there. It was going to be the battalion commander was going to come through. I think the brigade commander was going to come through. And I sat, and all the XOs, we sat in your office, me, Carl Benander, Rory O'Brien, Mike Pullen, the who's who of One Panther, right? And I said, hey, sir, we got that inspection tomorrow. Are you going to come down and check things? Maybe around like 12 or 1300 or something like that? And you said, nope, your guys are going to check it because your guys are going to make sure it's right. And I never forgot that. And I said, sir, what do you mean you're not going to check it? Like everybody's going to come through tomorrow. He goes, I believe in you guys. You guys were picked for a reason. I trust you. And you had taught us what I didn't know was you had already taught us like what the right way to do things. You know, you had already done enough inspections with us that you knew you could trust us. And when you did that, we all went down to the motor pool and we made sure that shit was lockstep. It was, you could snap a chalk line. It was perfect. We weren't going to let you down. And then the next day, when the commanders came out and they looked at it, they were smiling, they were nodding up and down, and you were just standing behind them with that look on your face, and you said, I told you. I told you you'd get it right. And I
Yeah.
never forgot that. And I said, that's the kind of leader I want to be. I want people to think that I trust them. But but what you taught me was you do those things behind the scenes to make sure you can trust them, right? At first, you did some things, you checked some other stuff so that you knew on game day, you could trust us to make those plays.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, the inspection timeline was in preparation for DRF1. And we'll talk about the impact of what happens to you as a soldier when you embrace readiness. But what no one tells you is how to decouple readiness as a civilian. And we'll get through that.
Yeah.
So make sure that we touch about it because that is important. And I'll highlight some examples of why if you don't go through a decoupling, it's kind of like, what Sebastian Younger tells us in Tribe. If we don't have a process for a warriors class to derobe and leave the battlefield behind, they won't be able to properly integrate. And we've lost that. And that's why, we do these veteran town hall meetings, et cetera. But that goes to the point of that's leadership. Why should I micromanage your readiness? If you're not ready, that's on you. And if you as a leader don't understand how to then make sure as an executive officer that you're the 2IC and that everything that shoots or communicates or moves is up to you. I can't be there when the saw malfunctions in the middle of a tick. You won't be there either. That team leader is going to rely that you did your job. So that's the whole concept, right? And we can get into that, but that's why that happened.
Yeah.
So I will touch on it.
Yeah, it was genius.
But you see the connection? You do that too. You know that, man. And that's I think what's going to be important when we have this conversation here in a little bit, and how those that decoupling has to happen, or else you're going to find yourself like me, doubting your veracity and stepping off the path of honor and integrity, and then having a crisis point to realize, okay, I am a good person, I am a good man. I have to get through this, and then I have to do better.
Yeah, and what we're gonna, the theme of today's conversation, dealing with crisis, and then how do you? I loved your comment, which was, what do you do with the gift of life? Now, can you give us a little bit of a spoiler alert, who you are, real quick, and what you're going through, what you're working through right now?
So my name is Jaime Martinez. I served in the Army for 26 years, former soldier and currently a leader in the veteran advocacy space. And I was medically retired in 2010 after beating 2 aggressive, life-threatening cancers. I had been diagnosed with a head and neck cancer, and that was due to toxin exposures, as well as a medullary thyroid carcinoma. And those were diagnosed simultaneously. In the summer of 2008, just as I was about to assume battalion command of 4-3 Infantry, which is the old guard in Fort Myer. And I would say that transition never ends. I find myself in Boulder currently as an executive and attorney for a global company that builds boats for the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. But today, as of this past year in late October, I'm fighting a 3rd cancer. And it's a tough fight because of the other physical issues from my previous medical treatment for 2 cancers. But most importantly, the challenges of my mental health and how the diagnosis was layered into a final reality that I needed to immediately address my mental health in order to continue to build resiliency and live a better life after I beat this cancer. So at the end of the day, while I may be in crisis, I'm very hopeful as I move forward over these next few months that the outcome will have me healthier and back online where I need to be so I can get back to the community.
Thanks for sharing so much of that, Jaime, and I can only imagine what it takes to get to that point, to the point where you're comfortable sharing it the way you just did, and saying the things that you say, so eloquently. That comes with 2008. I mean, we're looking at a decade and a half ago, and plus your military career, we're looking at 3.5 decades of military service, and since then, right? So being able to be this strong and be this confident and be where you are today, there's a lot that you went through in order to get there. What's your story? Where did you start? It took a long time to get to be the person that you are today, to be able to handle this and to be able to go in the direction that you're going to be going. Could you kind of start at the beginning about your story and who you are and how that's led to who you are today?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Matt. I mean, at the end of the day, I think anyone that you could have on this show will kind of highlight where they're at, and then I think everyone has a base and a foundation of where they came from. But I would remind everyone that in order for you to have your true authentic self, you have to really dig deep down into finding out exactly what shaped you, where your value proposition came in, how you've been able to overcome obstacles and challenges, both because of the life circumstances and those especially that you self-create, the mistakes that an individual makes. I think my story is unique in the sense that I was born in Chicago in '64 to two immigrant parents from Peru, and they were Spanish speakers, and ethnically representative of a new migrant class back then. And my mother and my father had left Peru because of a political system that did not allow for a middle class and had a class system and a military junta. And so there had been a series of coups in the 50s and early 60s, and my father had immigrated here first and then brought my mother and my brother and my sister and both his mother and my mother's mother here. And then I was born. I was born with a disease called Hirschsprung's that required me to be baptized and receive my last rites. Like later in life, and Walter Reed, an attending physician, said, I think we can get him to see a specialized pediatric GI doctor and look at what this problem is with his stomach. And so I did. And so I ended up being transferred over to Children's Memorial, and this doctor by the name of Swenson, who had created a different kind of surgical procedure, went ahead and saved my life, I guess, at the time. I ended up having 2 to 4 years of really difficult development and care. And so I was raised by my mother's mother and my father's father while we first started in the Chicago area, and then we moved out to the northwest suburbs. So we landed in a community of one or two Latin or Hispanic families, a couple African American families, a couple Asian families, and everyone else just living the dream in late '60s, early '70s in the northwest suburbs. Both parents would work, and the kids would basically either play outside all day and get themselves, in trouble, or go to school and do well there. And that's where I grew up. But I was small, malnourished, skinny, and had not developed at the pace that everyone else did. And I had a funny sounding name. And I used to beg the teacher day one not to pronounce my name improperly, and she would, and then I'd get made fun of. And I think I might have gotten in a few fistfights in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade just over my name. And then I realized that I was not as big as everyone, and I needed to run, so I could outrun everybody. I could just run. I could run. I could still run. And then I realized, I also, was taught how to read and write by one of my grandmothers before I kind of even went to kindergarten, both English and Spanish in a way. So I read everything, and I just said, well, I'm just going to be faster and smarter than all these clowns. And that still didn't get me anywhere because, it was just a great place to grow up. And I think what ended up happening was, a bit of validation in wanting to be accepted in the community, amongst my peers, within my family, within our culture. And so I just naturally gravitated to Boy Scouts. I saw on a Friday night these kids get their Boy Scout uniforms on and walk to our school and go into meetings, and I would sit there and look at that and like, man, I want to do that. Went home, Mom, can I do this? She's like, well, how much is it? I said, I think it's $12. She goes, oh, we can't afford that. We got to get a uniform and stuff. I was like, okay. I was like, And then one day I came home and she said, hey, go check out your room. I did. And there was a $12 check in a Boy Scout uniform. And I put that thing on and I sprinted the half mile to my school where the Boy Scout meeting was being had. And I just showed up to the Scoutmaster and said, hey, look, I'm Jaime Martinez. I had changed my name from Jaime to Jimmy. And I signed up, and that was the first time that I felt like I had validated myself to be accepted into something. I loved the discipline. I loved the uniform. I loved the formations. I loved the things that we had to do. We went camping, northwest side of Chicago. We were going up into northern Wisconsin, way in western Illinois, in camping. We had, figure out what we're going to eat, the skills and the badges that we're going to earn, and that's where I kind of developed an affinity to citizenship, and then I started getting good at it and worked my way up to Eagle Scout and into a specialized organization called Order of the Euro, where I was selected as a visual honor member and given the name of Lilikpin, which was in Lakota Indian, diligent one. And so at 16, I guess the scouting community felt that was kind of my value set. But more importantly, it was the scoutmasters and assistant scoutmasters. They had all served post-Korean War, pre-Vietnam, and they were very quiet about their service. But it kind of came out when we were out in the field or gone to the camp, the way how tough they were and how they taught us leadership. So that's how I grew up with the lifelong friends, and then my other group of friends that I grew up with, which I'm still in touch with today, all very successful in their own right. But I'm the only one that ended up joining the service. That's where I grew up in Hanover Park, Illinois, late 60s through the 70s, and graduated from high school in that area.
Very similar to some folks that I've spoken to before about whether it be the Air Force's Civil Air Patrol or, in your case, the Boy Scouts. There's so much out there, junior ROTC in high schools, that people went to, and they were influenced by service members that had served before, and they gravitated towards that. And so what took you in the direction of joining the Army?
Well, a few things. First of all, even though it might have sounded all rosy, there were some mistakes made during that journey to at least get out of Hanover Park and go to college. And those involved, either, or young, youthful, partying that, caused some concerns. Culturally, we worked hard and then we played hard. And my father was in a band. There was these legendary, fiestas in our home with his band, or sometimes actually they played down in the city of Chicago. And so we had this kind of very cultural environment. And there was no real accountability. It was almost like machismo in the sense of, oh, look, look what Jaimito did, look what, our other cousins or whatever did. And so that gave me kind of a false sense of, privilege, which I later had to learn how to handle. One of the things that drew me, I remember there was this one bully, last name was Makowiak, and he went off to the Marines. And one day we're all sitting around playing in someone's yard, and all of a sudden someone goes, holy crap, who's that? And coming from the bus stop was Makowiak in his dress uniform. And he just looked like, I was just like stunned. Kind of the first time that I saw the transformation, the transformative virtue of service. And here he came, and we all gathered around him, and he told us stories, and he was checking on us and seeing how we're doing and trying to say, hey, look, you don't do this anymore. Don't do that anymore. We're 12, 13 years old, and we're like, wow, this is pretty impressive. And so I always had that in my mind on top of the scouting. I ended up, my family had to relocate to Texas going into my senior year, and I stayed behind by myself. Ended up going to Eastern Illinois University, and so I showed up 17, a duffel bag full of stuff, and not even knowing what I was going to study, but I was going to college. And experienced my freshman year trying to figure out who I was and everything else a freshman in college would do. Got in trouble, the whole 9 yards. And then ended up seeing a couple ROTC cadets or people in uniform walking around and how they had beering. And I remember this one guy who was wearing the old OG 107s. He had a black beret on, and he had a Ranger tab on. And his name was Greg Combs, and he was in ROTC. And I remember seeing him on campus, and I remember just like if I saw him, I'd walk around and like check him out. And I was like, "Who is this guy?" And I ended up talking to him, and he was like, "Yeah, you should come and join ROTC, and maybe even go to the National Guard, and and see if you have what it takes to join." Freshman year ends, I go home to Texas to spend time with my family, and then I come back that sophomore year, and I was like, "Hey, look, I think I'm going to try this out. I'm gonna enroll in ROTC." So I do, and then I determined that I'm going to become an officer. But I'm struggling financially, and I'm like, I could also, maybe serve in a National Guard. And so I sign up for the National Guard, and I go to basic training in an AIT. And I had, gone from, I think, 5'7", and it came back at my current height of 5'11", 5'10", whatever, and went from like 140 and came back, 170. And we were like, do you have a younger brother? And I'm like, no, that's me. And so, and then now I'm totally into it. I went to basic training, AIT, I was at Fort Benning, I was at Harmony Church, I had, done it all there. And I remember going from Harmony Church to main post to do a dental call. And there was like 4 E2 OG 107, 3rd, 75th Rangers that came onto the bus. And they came in, and all those trainees just looked at them. We're like, we didn't say anything. We're like, holy shit, man. Those are E2 privates with tabs. They got scrolls. Those guys, wow. Look at those high tights. Look at those boots. So I already in my mind knew that, like, anything to do with the infantry or with that. And so go back to campus, and continue on in my, development as a student. And, I kept getting in trouble. I ended up graduating. And I also was in the Illinois National Guard, and I had moved up. I was a sergeant, had done an annual training. A couple of my friends that had gone through SMP, the Simultaneous Membership Program, were platoon leaders in that company. It was, a company that had its, 21st Infantry, and it had tie-in to Colonel Grant when he, in the spring of '61, had gone down to Mattoon, Illinois, and become the colonel of the 21st. And so there was a tie into that, and there was also a very crusty old first sergeant by the name of Mitchell, who pulled me aside one day and goes, you're not going to make it. I know you talk loud, but you're not going to make it. You're not disciplined enough. And I go, what do I got to do? And he's like, you need to start holding yourself accountable. So I started understanding a little bit about, setting the example and soldiering then, but I still hadn't really done anything other than, work through my college experience and wanted to be the first person in my family to graduate. So I did. And then within a week, I'd gotten in trouble and basically had lost my commission. I will tell you, Colonel, that that was, to me, obviously life-changing because I had failed. I had fought hard to get to that point, and I had not been mature enough to understand what my obligation and the seriousness was, and I was ashamed. I didn't tell my family. I had to go and live with friends and work off the gig in court, pay my fines, and then I just went to the recruiter and I said, put me on active duty, give me 11 Bravo. Can I go on active duty? And I had to get a medical waiver for the first condition, and I had to get a criminal waiver for what had happened. Hitchhiked from Central Illinois to St. Louis, went to the MEP station, begged the doctor to let me get through with the waiver, begged whoever the MEPS commander was to let me, go on active duty. And I ended up maxing out the ASVAB and was able to go ahead and do 11 Bravo with an airborne option. And I had to start all over. I had to go to basic and AIT all over again. And I said, I don't care. So they, got the bedding, Harmony Church, 2 barracks down from where I had been previously 2 summers ago, and started back up as, E2 nothing. Got through basic AIT, went to airborne school, and got assigned to the 82nd. And I was in hog's heaven. I was like, okay, well, if I can't be an officer right now, then I'm going to be the best trooper that I can be, and we'll see what happens later. So I ended up 2nd Brigade, the 325 Dub Regiment, and assigned to 4th Battalion 325 and Bravo Company and 2nd Platoon as a rifleman. And that is May of 1987. That's how I ended up starting on active duty as a paratrooper.
Just listening to you talk through, that beginning part it speaks to who you are today and the person that you've become. And when you say resiliency, when you say grit, holding yourself accountable, you can see where those things started. I'm going to do basic training twice. So now at our age, he's the kind of person that does whatever it takes to get through to accomplish the mission. It goes all the way back to growing up in Chicago, the Boy Scouts. You didn't start developing them once you got into the Army. You're finding that, God started pointing you in a direction and saying, I've got a path for you. I know where you're going to end up. You don't know where you're going to end up, but I do. And I'm going to start putting you on that path. What was the next path? We say God, other people say mentors, certain people that starts to see you and seeing some of the things that you were doing as a sergeant that made you stand out, that they believed in you.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I took a shot at a podcast a couple of years ago, and I tried to answer the similar type of questions. And I don't know if, then and now, I've gone through quite a bit to try to better understand myself, to better explain, and give credit both to my family and my community, my scout leadership, crusty old first sergeant, in Mattoon, Illinois, who's, threatened giving me Article 15s and says, no, instead, come here every day after your classes. And, I didn't have a way to get there. It was 9 miles away. So I had to run 9 miles. I had to work and buff floors and whatever. And then I had to run back and, whatever. So I give a lot of credit to that. And in regards to, the Gold Falcons, the 4th Battalion of 325, and 100 plus friends that I keep in close contact in social media, that we would do anything for each other. It all started there. While there's dozens and dozens of mentors at the time, there's a few standouts. And one of the standouts, obviously, is John Vines. Lieutenant Colonel Vines took command of 4th 325 shortly after I got there. And he brought in a command sergeant major by the name of Duke, who both of them realized they needed to go ahead and build up skill sets at the junior enlisted level. So they pushed for volunteers to go to Ranger School. And now I hadn't been there more than 10 months, and I raised my hand and said, I want to go right now. And back in the day, Bragg had a pre-ranger course, which was basically a three-week suck fest. And didn't really learn anything, but just, stay awake and get poison ivy and carry the 60 around. So, and then, I just remember my first sergeant, Willie West, a great American, pulled me aside and he goes, all right, Martinez, we're promoting you to E4, so you're just an E3, E4, you're the first guy in this experiment. So don't screw this up. So I ended up headed down to Benning for boys and, going to Ranger School. And did not get recycled. Went through Ranger School as an E3, E4. And I had, quite the spiritual moments a few times, both in what was the city phase at the time, up in the mountains, in the swamps, and then we also had a desert phase. And the desert phase is interesting is because I ended up having a high altitude entanglement and having a concussion. And they found me in a drop zone just walking around the wrong direction. So I ended up waking up at the ER at the hospital in Salt Lake City. And there was an escaped convict that had broken through his bonds, and he was Native American, and he was whacked out on drugs, and he was running around the ER, and he came over and leaned down at me while I was trying to wake up, and he just screamed at me, and I was just like, what is going on here? And I fell out again. I was like, did I imagine that? And then, woke up in a room, and they're like, okay, you had a concussion, and they're going, look, can I get recycled? Please tell my unit and release me. And in the meantime, am I allowed to eat? They're like, yeah. They're like, okay, I want everything on the menu times 3, and I want every ice cream bucket that you have. So I literally have my own room, and I had all these trays with all this food. I'm sitting there, and this RI walks in. He goes, what in the hell is going on here, Ranger? He goes, you have 5 minutes to get your shit on and follow me and get in my truck, and we're going back, or you're lucky you don't get recycled. I'm like, okay. And I'm sitting there shoving mashed potatoes and everything, putting shit in my pocket. We get in this truck, and now we got to drive from Salt Lake out to Dugway Proving Grounds, right? And he stops. He doesn't talk. He's just smoking a Marlboro, just like, the ash doesn't break off. He's just sitting there, and we're listening to Johnny Cash, and I'm trying to talk him up. He's like, ain't no time to talk. I'm like, oh shit, all right, no, whatever. And he stops at a KFC, and he gets a bucket of chicken. I'm like, yes, a bucket of chicken. And he sits there, and we drive. He doesn't give me a damn piece of chicken. He eats a piece of chicken and throws it, the bones out the window, the whole 2-hour ride. I'm like, you motherfucker. all right, okay, all right. And then I get back, and literally, I have to run into these barracks. I have no idea. I missed all of the pre-desert training that, this is how you kill a rattlesnake, and this is how you set up a hooch at night, and this is how you navigate and shit. And literally jumped on patrol. Well, so I would have got recycled, right? And I did not want to get recycled. I just didn't want to. So I graduated, and I have a chipped tooth and a noggin, and some crazy story that I've never shared before. But anyway, I ended up coming back, and then first sergeant said, "All right, you're going to go to jump master school." I'm like, okay. So I went to jump master school, and that is an extremely difficult school. I boloed every first test and passed the retest, to include JMPI. But I remember graduating and turning around and passing JMPI, and the black hat was like, "All right, you pass roster number XYZ, whatever." And I just remember just dropping to my knees and crying because that was a huge accomplishment, just like Ranger School, but that was even more because I knew that I was proficient in my skills. And so that was, me just growing up as a rifleman and assistant dragon gunner. Don't jump one of those things. An RTO, and then going to Ranger School and coming back and like, okay, now you're going to be a rifle team leader. That's the first time I got to lead something. And I had 3 Joes assigned to me. I was like the happiest person in the world. Someone asked me a couple years ago, what was your favorite job? And I said, being a rifle squad leader. And I moved up to be a rifle squad leader. And I had 8 Malakas, and we were dressed right, squared away, maxing the PT test, just building SOPs, clearing rooms, doing all the things together, and it was great. But there was quite the weekend party environment as well at Fort Bragg at the time. And I didn't understand what the big army was just yet. All I knew was that I was in my space and I was doing well, and I would reach out and talk to my family, but I had not shared anything of what had happened to me. And then I got selected to go to the Scout Platoon, and the Scout Platoon were all the tab NCOs, and they were all the badasses, and they got to, do little things with their uniform different, and they stood out a little bit, but they were the PT machines, and I was like, I could do this. And I failed the first tryout. I couldn't climb the rope 10 times in a row right after a PT test. And one of the scout squad leaders came to find me that next Saturday morning. It tested on Friday. He woke me up on Saturday morning. He brought me out there and he just smoked my ass in Area J and made me climb the ropes, and he showed me how to do it. And then he retested me on Monday and I passed. So I got into scouts and I was like, okay, now I'm really like squared away. During that time frame, I was the NCO of the year, and then I was selected to participate in the 45th anniversary of D-Day and got to jump into Aldershot and then to Normandy. And I jumped U.S. colors and got to carry the colors from the drop zone to St. Mary de Lys. And then got to spend 10 days in, Normandy, going from place to place. Got in a big brawl with the 101st in a bar. We did not get in trouble. So it was just a life of Riley until we got alerted and had to go to the 18-hour sequence. And we're like, oh, what's going on? What's going on? And when the MP showed up and put a concertina wire around, and the first siren went up and cut all of the payphones, we knew it was serious. And my PL said, all right, all squad leaders. And he's like, Martinez, you speak Spanish, right? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, all right, come with me. So we went to the battalion headquarters. So here I am. It's my first exposure of being in that back bench. Here I am again, where I have this, thought to my head, years later, where I find myself in a situation room and I'm looking around at some of these, people in our national government as we're trying to deal with, Afghanistan and Iraq. And I'm like, how the hell did I find myself here? And we got orders that we were going to participate in the invasion of Panama and try to capture, Manuel Noriega. And we're doing it within, the next 14 hours because we already had burned 4 hours. And so we went through the entire sequence, and then the next thing you know, jumping into Panama. That's a whole story in itself. But went through that, came back, got recognized for those efforts, and then 8 months later, we were DRF-1, and we deployed as part of the response to Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, and ended up spending time with Lieutenant Colonel Vines, one of our training exercises out there, and he was following up on a rumor that he had heard from my company commander, who had found a document trove that I had during an inspection in my wall locker that actually had a copy of my commission from May of '86. Now here we are in fall of '90 in Kuwait, and basically 4 years later. And I had told my company commander what had happened, and whatever. And he said, "Well, you should try out for OCS." And so I tried and got denied because there had been some actions taken by the ROTC unit to affect my file. So I didn't know any better, and so I just continued to grind on, but I still wanted to be an officer, and so I hang out with Vines, and he's like, "Hey, look, I understand what happened. I think you got treated unfairly. You should have been an officer back then. You should write your senator." And at the time, it was Senator Helms. So I write a letter explaining everything that happened, and we didn't use any postage then. We just wrote free mail on the envelope, and then I sent it off. Didn't think about it. Ended up, participating in the invasion of Iraq as a scout squad leader. Had to do some, cross-border reconnaissance and confirm the MSR, and got compromised one time, and had a few adventures in that regard. Got recognized for that, and then when I got back, I got a phone call from the S1, Pete Newell, Colonel Newell. He said, "Hey, get up here." And I said, I got up there, and I ran into him in the Vines and said, "Hey, look, it looks like the Army came back and was making a determination in your case." It ended up going to the Department of the Army IG, Inspector General, and it looks like they're going to commission you. So you need to go up to DC, and you need to be there Monday morning. So I drove up to DC. I stayed at Fort Myers at the enlisted barracks, put on my Class A's, and showed up at the Pentagon in late April of 1980 or 1991. I was supposed to ETS at the end of May of 91 or reenlist. And I met some colonel, and he walked me through the crazy Pentagon. Went to some office. I met some two-star general, and he said, "All right, look, we want to apologize. You should have been commissioned back in 1986. You did not have due process. It looks as if you were discriminated against, and the record is clear that while you did, make a mistake, and shouldn't have been driving that car that night. You turned everything around, and you have full endorsement from your chain of command. So we'd like to go ahead and let you know that you're going to get commissioned, and you get your choice of assignment, and we're going to promote you to first lieutenant, and here's your back pay." So I'm like stunned, shocked. I said, "I don't want back pay. I'll start over again as a second lieutenant. I really don't care, but I just wanted to see if the process was going to do its justice." And so I remember driving that 5 hours back. There's no cell phones, whatever. And just driving back and going and reporting the Vines, who was on his way out. He was changing command. And he just said, "Look, we fought for you. Now, do us well. Go lead troops." And so I picked 7th Infantry Division because I wasn't allowed to stay at Bragg. And there wasn't a slot in the 173rd at the time. So 7th ID was supposed to move to Fort Lewis, and I was going to try to go to 2nd and 75th because that's where Duke was, the sergeant major at the time. And a bunch of NCOs had gone from 4325 to the 75th and ended up in 2nd Bat. So that was my goal. And I ETS and took the summer and went and met up with one of my best buds who had ETS, a kid by the name of John Palucci, a sergeant, and he lived in Boston. And I went to go hang out with him, and then I went. At the time, I was with my girlfriend, who ended up becoming my wife, and we drove up to the Mount Washington area and up in northern New Hampshire, and I ended up getting a job bartending and hiking and just hanging out there until the official letter got there. And I got a phone call. It was my father, and my father was like, "Hijo, tengo una carta. I got a letter here. It looks official. Should I open it?" I'm like, "Dad, open it up. I'll do it. So he opens it up, and I hear him. He goes, oh, and like, what does it say? And so in his accent, he's like, he tells me that I'm commissioned and I'm going to be a first lieutenant. I got orders, and I have to be at Fort Benning by 1 October. And I'm listening to this, and I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm like, okay. And I walked up to whoever had hired us and whatever. I'm like, all right, I'm turning in my stuff. I'm out of here. Let's go. And so we jumped in a car and we drove from New Hampshire to Texas. And I got to Texas to hang out with my family. And I basically, was running like 10, 15 miles a day, like went and got a high and tight, got rid of the ETS belly and just couldn't wait to come back to Fort Benning. And so that's what happened there, brother.
What a great story. I'm so captivated just listening to it. You get to Fort Benning, and then you spend, I'm not sure how fast you want to kind of go through from officer days up into to battalion command. The
capstone event is showing up at the 7th Infantry Division as a platoon leader. Became a scout squad leader, and then there was the deployment in support of the riots in Los Angeles. So Operation Garden Plot, 5th Battalion, 21st Infantry, 7th Infantry Division, federal orders, deployed, no notice, 18-hour sequence. There again, we are DRF1. We go down there, and I have to do 3 weeks of civil disturbance. And that was an eye-opener as far as big army, what that all meant. Due process, treatment of our citizens by law enforcement, and I had two African American soldiers that refused to go. I had to deal with that situation. It was this different perspective. I have a different optic. I didn't have the, hey, work hard, party hard. It was now like, hey, look, it doesn't matter where you have to go. You could go to the home front, or you can go downrange, but you've got to be consistently ready. And then just as the 7th Infantry Division was closing out, I was asked to lead the division's marksmanship team, and we deployed to Fort Benning for a 2-week marksmanship championship under what's known as the U.S. Army Marksmanship Championship, USMAX. And I had to I was able to pick from the division all the best marksmen at a competition, and then that's when I started understanding how to train differently and push the envelope. I went and got a SWAT team from Monterey Police Department to come and train us, and the Sheriff's Department to teach us how to shoot properly. And then we did KD ranges, known distance ranges, without optics. So those two development phases of understanding what my responsibilities were as an officer and building a team from scratch to do unique things ended up being kind of like melding pots. I ended up commanding 3 rifle companies, mechanized. For my sins as a light fighter and a paratrooper, the Army sent me to be a mechanized warrior. And so I embraced that, first in Germany, but then at Fort Hood and Cavazos now. And that was Alpha 27 Cab and 19 Cab in the HHC, and then Delta Company in the Old Guard. And that was 41 months of straight command. Each command I looked at it as a privilege, and I was humbled. But I was gonna merit and organize it in a way that would identify incubator of leadership with lethality. And so the Bradley Company, I changed the names to the Alpha Company Rangers up front. I had a PT test day one with the company leadership. My XO failed it, and I fired him. And then I promoted one of the rifle platoon leaders, a kid named Mike Trotter, to be the company XO. And then I brought another platoon leader on board, and we ended up building that company and basically decided to turn the Table 8 and Table 12 requirements for gunnery upside down. I taught them how to take the Bradleys through the breach onto the objective, literally onto the trenches, to drop the ramp and to have the infantry drop off the ramp into the trenches, and using the Bradley as a base of fire to cover them as they went through the trench line. Did all the proper training for that. Had the senior leadership show up out of the blue because they heard there was some crazy stuff going on in the ranges. They tried to shut me down, and then I said, you want to do this? Kid up, let's go. And then that became kind of like the new model for how to aggressively, concept of speed kills, use your platforms. And then I developed the cone of fire, which is basically, mass all your fires into one point of penetration and then open up those fires and create a wall on the left and right, and then let Joe go through that wall to get into the trench, so to speak, and do that for urban as well. Fast forward 10 years later, some of those privates became sergeants, and they were part of the 27 Cav that was in Fallujah 2, and they used those TTPs. So in the headquarters company, I basically deployed everyone day one of command maintenance and command. And we had, 307 pace air items, vehicles, and we could only dispatch like 45 on day one. So they all thought, okay, we're going to try again next week. Nope, we did it again the next day, and we did it again the next day, and we did it again. We did it so many times, and we finally got everything FMC and literally just jumped it across the street and set up. And so I shut down the DFAC. I made folks come out to the field to eat tactically. and got ring mounts and heavy weapons, and everyone qualified, and we started doing live fire ranges for the headquarters, and I changed the name to Savages and inculcated a lethality premise that basically was a model for the rest of the division, and that's what we were doing, was anything to do with that. And did the same thing when I came to the old guard, and that's where I realized the true cost of war. Did hundreds of funerals in Arlington, and there's a whole subset culture on how to do that properly. But when you have to hand a set of folded flags to widows and survivors 4 times a day, and tell them that on behalf of a grateful nation, and the President of the United States, respectfully, you go through that. It kind of dulls you emotively for how to handle grief later on in life. But for me at the time, it was another opportunity to mold a company, and volunteered to do a training rotation in support of a ranger exercise at Benning. And so we went to Benning. And so while we were the Op 4, I also was given a week and a half of range time. And so I took a company that was just used to doing ceremonies and funerals to making them lethal, and explained and taught them how to conduct urban ops and to cone a fire and like that. So those 3 companies, and then move forward, and I end up having to spend time in the Pentagon. Ended up there right before 9/11, and ended up being a junior military assistant to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and my boss was 1-star Jim Mattis, and that's when I learned the larger concept of policy development and politics in the military. He left, and then General Batiste showed up, and he had been my brigade commander in Germany. And so then the next thing I know it, I got punted over, and I ended up working for Vice President Cheney as the staff secretary for national security affairs. And in that job, I had to manage the flow of national security information and all of the briefings to the vice president and to the chief of staff. And then 9/11 happens. And so I'm at the White House at 9/11. And then after that 24, 36-hour cycle, I got elevated to special advisor status, and I was put on the counterterrorism task force, and then also picked up the Western Hemisphere advisor position because I spoke Spanish. And in those 2 roles, I took on deadly serious. I ended up going to the agency and spending weeks there, learning everything about every Latin American country, and then developing a plan to help convince a few countries that were on the UN Security Council to vote on behalf and support of the President Bush's initiatives for Iraq a couple years later. And then was involved in daily operations and counterterrorism threat to include, the anthrax attacks and everything. So here I was, kind of felt like Forrest Gump, like, uh-oh, what am I doing here in the, Situation Room with Dr. Rice and Colin Powell and Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby and Don Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, and there I am backbenching, taking notes. I'm like, please don't call on me. Don't call on me, because I'm not going to say what you guys want me to say. But I learned a hell of a lot about that, and working for the vice president was humbling experience. When my father passed, they were very gracious to me and allowed me time. But once we got ready to go into Iraq, and I knew what was going on, and I was morally challenged on what I was seeing and what was happening, I had a conversation with the vice president and with Scooter Libby, and I said, I've got orders if you guys allow me. I didn't have orders, Colonel. I basically said, I got to get out of here. I'm dying on the vine here, man. There's another war, and this is in Afghanistan. I've been in a suit for 2 or 3 years. I'm going to law school at night. Got long hair. Um, I'm getting 70s on my PT. This is bullshit. I got to get out of here. So I basically figured out a way to get out of there. Called up branch and said, hey, they're deploying me. Then called up, a buddy of mine. Hey, do you got a slot? Just created some orders, and I got out of there. And 36 hours later, I was at Carson with the fourth ID. 24 hours later, I was drawing sensitive items at Kit, and then 5 hours later, we're on a plane headed to Kuwait to go ahead and cross the line as fourth ID because fourth ID had been denied access to the north. The brigade commander had been my battalion commander in 19 Cav, and he asked me to run the tactical assault command, the TAC, as the OIC. And so, 5 days prior, I was in a suit, and then next thing you know it, I'm, in the back of a, command track, with 6 headsets in my hands, with something called Blue Force Tracker, trying to, memorize the names of every damn unit and call sign, and building a plan to cross the deck and then, move forward downrange. And, my family thought I was insane, but I just had this commitment to serve. I recall Colonel Vines getting on top of a platform right before we crossed the berm into Iraq back in 91. And he said, every day evil people wake up, pray 5 times, and want to kill Americans. And it's our job to deny them that ability to do so. And that's how I was raised in the military, and that's what I ended up doing. And I ended up completing that tour, coming back to the Marine Command and Staff, continuing to go to law school at night, and then showed up as the Battalion XO of 1st Battalion, 505th, where I met a young First Lieutenant Matt LeClaire.
I think the story is you came up to me and you said, we had just got back from Fallujah. No, we just got back from Afghanistan. We went from Fallujah to Afghanistan, back from Afghanistan, and I really wanted to go to the Ranger Regiment, to go back to 1st Ranger Battalion to be a platoon leader. And I remember you came up and put your hand on my shoulder and you said, we're going to send you in about 6 months, but we need you to go over to Bravo Company to be the XO for a few months. And I said, yes, sir. And off to Bravo Company I went to be the XO with John Woolfolk and Benny Dobbs, God rest his soul.
Yep. So, I fought to get back to the 82nd. Rear Detachment Commander was Colonel Donahue, who was the 1st Brigade Commander, and he did not recommend me for assignment there because I was no longer relevant in the airborne world and I should go back to mech. No way, I'm going back to the 82nd. I got orders. Come to find out that someone had told Corps Commander Vines that Martinez is coming back to Bragg and is trying to get back to Bragg. And my first job had been G3, and Charlie Flynn said, get the hell out of here. Go down to 2nd Brigade. You're going to be the Brigade 4. I said, okay, I'm back to the brigade. I'm back in the regiment. Can't wait to tell all my Joe friends that, Crazy Martinez is a field grade officer and logistician for the regiment. And then a week later, I ended up showing up at One Panther. So I left the family back in Virginia. My wife at the time was an assistant superintendent of a school district, and my son was an EFMP. And so I just, went to Bragg, and then I lived in the office and had a cot. And when I wasn't in the field or if we weren't deployed, then I would drive home for the weekends. But I lived in the office there, and I recognized that as an executive officer, as 2IC, that I needed to build a team, and that's why I started having daily huddles, if you recall, at 5:30 in the morning with all the XOs and the S1, the S2, the S3, and the S4. And we would do a daily battle rhythm check to make sure that anything and everything that the line XOs needed, that they could support their company commander. And then we had one at the end of the day. And I remember you guys would be like, sir, why are we meeting at the end of the day? I'm like, because something can happen between tonight and tomorrow morning. We get called out, and that's what we're going to do. So that was, one of the ways that I wanted to build a team of like-minded warfighters that understood what their role was, which was to support the commander, but at the same time integrate the staff the best to provide the best resources for the outcomes that are needed for the mission success. We deployed to Afghanistan. You went down to Zermatt. We were there for the elections. We missed the opportunity to kill Ahmad Shah, who ends up coming back later for the lone survivor story less than a year later. I'm at odds with the battalion commander, and I land, and then a few months later, the CG calls me up and says, hey, I know we were going to move you to be the Brigade XO for 3rd Brigade, but I need you to go work for Pat Donahue in 1st Brigade. I'm like, the guy who did not want me to be in division, I have to show up and say, hey, I'm your Brigade XO, and by the way, we're deploying the next day. So next thing you know it, I deploy for a year as the Brigade XO. The Brigade XO, who was actually downrange, I had to show up and like relieve him in place. And then we built a team there, and then we were there for a year. Came back and ended up being assigned to OCLL and got assigned to Senator Clinton's office as their military fellow. And this is right after the midterms. Rumsfeld gets fired. Bob Gates comes in. Petraeus becomes a 4-star. The surge happens, and she announces her desire to run for president at the same time as Senator Obama. And I'm like, what am I doing here? And she ends up being a phenomenal mentor and a boss. And she basically says, I want to see you every morning. I want you to tell me what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. I want you to tell me what the 10th Mountain is doing. And I want you to tell me anything and everything that any New York National Guard or Reserve unit's doing. And I want you to tell me if we have casualties from the night before. And then I want you to help me write all the legislation that we're going to do for the military and support. And I'm interested in body armor. I'm interested in treatment of, survivors and their families. And I'm interested in the operational temple of the troops. And that was day one when I showed up to her office to report. And I spent a full year in her service and with her professional team. And it was interesting because, I spent 2 years with Cheney's team on one side of the aisle. And then I spent a year with her and her team on the other side of the aisle. And here I am being apolitical, and I'm just trying to serve as an officer, pinching myself saying, what the hell? How does this happen where I'm working on these national security issues and advising these senior leaders? But I accepted that was the direction that I had developed into, and that I was, humbled at the opportunity. I came up with a command list. I did not get the, unit in the 82nd, which was not necessarily available, but I thought maybe I could. And then I was told initially that I could end up in the 1st ID, which was fine. And then most likely I was going to go to the 4-3, a new unit that had untold capacity in the old guard, because I had commanded there previously. And I graduated from law school, and I discovered a monster-sized lump on my neck, and at the graduation. And so I had orders to be a battalion commander in one pocket. I had a law degree that I had earned on my own and even in the other pocket. I had a family looking at me, like, wow, you're really doing great, Jaime. And then, the photo of me having my diploma in my hand with the dean's hand shaking my hand, I looked like one pissed off paratrooper. I'm just like, I can't believe this happened. Because I knew what was going on, Colonel. I knew that I was sick. And so I went through a series of 2 to 3 weeks at Walter Reed. I went and spoke to the vice chief, and I went and spoke to the chief. And I said, what should I do? And they said, you should take command because it'll keep you alive. If you go home, you're You're not going to have much spirit. We need you to fight through this. You're going to be fine. And I had been diagnosed with 2 cancers. They were both very aggressive, and the medical team at Walter Reed didn't know what to do. And I had to go up there for a final appointment to set up my treatment, surgery, radiation, chemo. And I don't know if you went to the old Walter Reed from the Pentagon, but the best way to do it was to take the orange line. And so I did, and then cross over to the red line and then walk a couple blocks, then you're Walter Reed because it's way up north. I'm in North DC. So I do that, and then I come back, and I'm just like, I'm scared. I'm upset, and I get off the red line. I look up, and you know who's standing there? Lieutenant General retired John Vines. He's got a briefcase in his hand, and he just looks up at me, and he goes, Martinez. And I went up to him, and he had a habit of punching you in the chest and saying, just jacking you in the chest, you are a great American. How are you? And I broke down. And I know I tell the story a bit, but it's true that, how is it that in the grand scheme of things, in the global population, of all the billions of people, on a hot platform in the Pentagon, that someone walks out and looks up and it's their lifelong mentor, and he's standing there, and he was in town doing some mentorship. He was heading back to Alexandria to do some stuff. And I told him, I was crying and shit, and he looks at me and he says, all right. He goes, I didn't commission you for you to quit. You're gonna make it through this. I need you to fight this, and you need to make the Gold Falcons proud. I love you like a son. Take care, airborne. We saluted each other. He got on the train. I saluted the train. I turned around and I was like, okay, I got my marching orders. And so, yeah, that's what happened up to that point. I reported for duty in the old guard. I activated 4-3 infantry. I changed their names from Defenders to Warriors. I ended up and had Scotty Sensala, the XO, go and get a platoon of Vietnam-era 4-3 infantry that served in 4-3, so they could march in the platoon that we reactivated the battalion. And so we activated the battalion, and then I continued to fight cancer. I was down to about 139 pounds. And was put in charge of the President Obama's inauguration, and also told to get a deployment task force together, and drove the staff to go ahead and create this deployable module that would have an infantry company, 2 MP platoons, a mortar platoon, logistics platoon, and then other enablers and combo folks, a couple spoons, and have that available to deploy, because we had coordinated an MTO. And during that whole year in command, while I was fighting cancer, I had extraordinary challenges with that unit as far as discipline-related issues. The old guard at the time wanted to have a ethos of, paragons of virtue. Couldn't do anything wrong, and they just kept sweeping things under the floor. Attempted suicides, military or sexual assault, all sorts of problems that I was confronting head on. And as I got closer to ringing the bell and getting out of treatment and gaining some weight back and coming back on the line, that's when the chain of command moved to medically retire me. And so I got medically retired, no notice, from command. And my family and I moved back to Chicago, my home record, and that's when the next phase of my story goes. So that was my service. I was very proud of it. I felt like I had been abandoned by the institution. I had lost my identity. There was no transition services at the time. There was none of the good things that we see today on LinkedIn, etc. And I showed up home, not knowing what I was going to do or who I even was anymore.
Man, that's a great segue into call it the second 2/3 or the second half of our conversation, which is, you're going through the medical retirement. You've moved back to Chicago. Your family. You're thinking about how your separation from the military, the identity that you had from being in the military for so long, and you were trying to figure those things out. I think I wrote them down. You said you come out of battalion command. You graduate from law school, you're staring at your family, you got cancer, you got to beat it, and then off we go to Chicago.
The alignment on a timeline is that I find it unbelievable that I run into Vines and he tells me to fight and live. To me, that's just like, hey, I need you to go up this escarpment in the middle of the night. And he, 3 days before the rest of us come up the escarpment to Iraq, Marty. And I need you to go as far as you can with your comms picture, bring a couple engineers, test the MSR to make sure that all of the road network works. Don't get compromised. Tell us what's up there, and then we'll come back down and then tell us what's going on so we can get the plan together. That kind of order you get from someone when you're in E5, in the middle of the desert, as jets are flying over to bomb, Iraq in January and February of 1991, fast forward, and when you get that kind of an order to stay alive, that's what you do, right? I mean, that was my DNA. And a year after that, when the Army says, hey, look, we're medically retiring you, this goes back to, what I'm dealing with now with, this third cancer diagnosis in as many years is, what do you do with the gift of life, right? You can go on TED Talks, you can go and read all sorts of stories of people that have survived, all sorts of traumatic experiences. We have service members that have multiple amputees, grievously burned, and they have found the resiliency to survive and do something with their lives. But they're all struggling because they've never been given the formula or the tool set to answer the question of what do you do with that gift of life? They sure as hell didn't tell me. What ended up happening was, within my family, I was on this pedestal, within my friend group that read my story that was breaking in the news or whatever, I had this different kind of status, but that doesn't help when you transition in such a shocking way, because if you have previous abandonment issues that you never dealt with, you didn't even know what those were, and you're an institution that you love dearly and you're willing to, deploy 6 times and give your life and limb eyesight for, turns its back on you. It didn't. It had to deal with the medical issue that I had, but at the time, that's what I thought. And institutions make great strides in taking care of its own, and they also have, challenges, and they make mistakes, and whether or not I should have been allowed to stay in active duty is a different question. But at the time, in May of 2010, we had, as a family unit, been disrupted with deployments and with this cancer diagnosis, and then boom, we decided to go back home. So before I even answer that question, and what do you do with the gift of life as it applies to today, between then and 2010 and October of 23, that 13-year bucket, I will tell you that while it may look as if I had answered that question, in reality, I was struggling and had quite a bit of a challenge, not only in my professional career to find my identity again, but also in my marriage, and also in my financial well-being, and also in my relationships post, where I did not know how to communicate. I did not know how to be vulnerable, and I did not and would not address my mental health challenges. So with that as a lead-in now to this next phase, to get toward the end, ultimately, when you're in those kinds of scenarios, and I think for the listeners that have had their own personal traumas, I think we all hold ourselves accountable, but in the short term, right? It's situational awareness of where you're at, but really you have to really look at your mental health in the longer term and be able to pull that thread and have the temerity to look yourself in the mirror and admit what you could do better. I could not survive in the corporate world, even though I had a law degree. I tried to be a corporate attorney, and I had nothing in common. It was all the bottom line. It was people that were going through the recession. There was a realignment in the legal field, like all fields. And I was showing up, trying to put, the word sauce of what I did in the service into a resume, to have some partner look at me and say, this is all great, but can you litigate? Can you draft up a 30-page appeal, in response to a filing overnight? Can you do this? Can you do that? And, my law school experience was simply to be a better informed leader, senior leader. I wanted to understand the rule of law. I wanted to understand international relations. I wanted to understand contract law. I wanted to understand, human rights. I want to understand international trade. And that's what I studied in law school. I didn't study torts. I didn't study, how to be an ambulance chaser or do insurance defense or family law or anything. I didn't do that. So I already came in to the ecosystem behind the curve. And we were living in the western side of Chicago, about an hour out, and I had to commute every day. And so I was, the happy family man in the suburbs, even though I wasn't connected very well at all to any of my neighbors and any of the gentlemen that I had met, because I had nothing in common with them. They were under second wives. They were had all the toys. They were wealthy. I had nothing in common with them. They did not have a sense of service. So I was already disconnected there. But in Chicago and in trying to get a job, I felt more of a thrive, more of the urban belt, and I gravitated to veteran advocacy. I started helping homeless veterans that I would run into. I'd see, get off the train and go to an interview or whatever, and then I'd see someone with the, help me, I'm a homeless veteran, and so I'd start talking to them. And I started helping them figure out, okay, I did not know that they could not access the VA for any medical care, and they clearly needed that. So I, figured out how to go ahead and write a memo that would get them into the door to go ahead and see if they can get some temporary status to get evaluated for some of the medical care. I didn't know about expunging criminal records for petty crimes in the city of Chicago or Cook County. But I knew that if they couldn't clear that, then they wouldn't be able to get any kind of employment. So I learned how to expunge stuff. So I was slowly figuring out, and I picked up the identity of, well, I'm still in command. I'm still serving. I'm not downrange, but I'm here on the front. I'm here where it matters. And then that led me to link up with a friend of mine who was setting up a clinic at a law school at John Marshall, a veterans legal clinic. And he asked me to join a team as a staff attorney. And we started, developing a program for veteran law. And I became a professor, an adjunct professor, and I was teaching veteran law and also handling a bunch of veteran claims, both for civil matters. And then I got placed, through those efforts, I got placed by the governor onto a task force to establish veteran treatment courts. And the veteran treatment court, basically a diversion style court where any veteran that self-identifies that doesn't commit a violent felony goes into the program, 9 months, they admit their guilt, they work in a program with a bunch of stakeholders, get them employed, get them to behave, clean them up, and then send them back out. A successful graduate, and the recidivism rate is zil. A very successful program. We started that in Illinois, and I was part of that, and then became a nationwide program. Now we have over 300 veteran treatment courts throughout the country. Proud of that effort. And then from that work, I was given some kind of set of remarks at some thing, and the next thing I know, I was invited by the governor to meet, and then I got hired to be the general counsel for the Department of Veteran Affairs in Illinois. And so now I had restored some of my identity. And a lesson for the listener is in any transition, in any setting where you're coming out of crises and you're trying to reestablish your identity, you need to listen and you need to communicate. And I was not listening and I wasn't communicating. I was amped up because I felt that from meeting veterans under underpasses and seeing how we couldn't get them the care, that no one cared. And so I cared. And so I was going to make a difference. And so I was pushing buttons, and but I was getting it done. And so I was rewriting regulations. We didn't have any regulatory framework in the Department of Veteran Affairs for all of the new post 9/11 programs, benefits and grants and education, all sorts of stuff. So I became, an administrative law attorney and filed and enacted the entire regulatory body and all these laws to set up that framework. I didn't know how to do that. I went down to Springfield and I hung out with all the admin law geeks for 2 weeks to learn how to write that specific kind of administrative law that is boring as hell, but is critical. So you can pass the law, but it's not in effect until the regulation goes in. So that's what I did. So then I built the framework. So I built the legal framework on how to go ahead and get all your state benefits and all your grants and everything. And then I was the compliance officer. So then I went after all of the nonprofits in the state that were securing state dollars through grants for their programs. And guess what I found out, Colonel? 95% of that state money that was going to those programs wasn't being spent on veterans. It was going to salaries and buildings and buttons and whiz-bang and bling. And so when I started holding those people accountable and taking that money away, that's when the political whispers would start, hey, Representative X, we're providing you, a handful of votes for your reelection, but, got this guy up in the Department of Veteran Affairs that's taking our money away. And then the call would come down from the governor's office and I'd say, no, go get bent. And so, I learned through therapy recently that if you don't learn how to read the room, you won't be successful no matter how passionate you are about any advocacy. And that goes to relationships too. And I would tell you and your listeners who have deployed and understand this concept is that you can find yourself in a market in Fallujah and you can sense when, something is about to turn ugly. You can read that room. You could be in Zermatt, one of the most evilest places in Afghanistan. Why? Because it was isolated from the road network and allowed, and it was perfect for that gap from Gardez to coast to develop and either go to the ring road or go to the JD road. And that's how that tribe survived. And that's why they were so evil. And that, right? You read that, Colonel. But I couldn't read the room when I went and talked to a bunch of funders and asked them for money for programs. Or I couldn't read the room when I sat down with stakeholders and who had been doing nonprofit support for neglected communities for years. And I was pissed off because they weren't fast enough in taking care of some World War II veteran that was homeless and riding the A train back and forth from O'Hare. And to them, that was like, okay, that's someone that just, needs to stay homeless for 3 more days to qualify for care. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I will take him home. I will house him until we get him, what he needs. I didn't know how to read the room. And I would share that with you if you want to have a conversation on that, because it's really important to understanding, if you're ever going to advocate or if you're ever in crisis and you're coming back into, performance objectives, your style of communication, your tone and tenor is very, very important. You may be the most empathetic person in the dugout. You may be the most fully hearted man or woman But if you can't communicate what your desire is, you're not going to be successful. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so much about reading the room, understanding, being able to communicate, like just in our life, being able to communicate with your soldiers and being able to communicate with the families about what your overall intent is and the direction where you're going. Then you make it takes you years and years and years to kind of develop that in the military. Then you separate from the military and people think, well, since I was successful here, I'll be successful there. And we've all heard the old book of what got me here won't get me there. You've got to modify the way you communicate with a different type of people as you go forward. You can't just use the same exact ways. Just because I was successful at this means I'm going to be successful at that.
That's right. That's right. And that body of work, because like all things in Illinois, there are elections, and so if you're working on the public sector for one governor, if he loses, then you're fired the day the next governor gets inaugurated. That's how that works. If you're going to be in the C-suite, and so I found myself back in the empty space, and by this time I was separated. By this time I was divorced. By this time, my son and daughter were finishing up high school and going to college. And I moved around a lot, and I was not very stable. But I made sure that on the veteran advocacy side that mission set continued. I then stood up a statewide legal support service for veterans for free in a network, and had a bunch of attorneys providing pro bono, and got grant money and set that up. I then was asked to lead a statewide non-for-profit as the executive director, and I focused on a few things. I focused on developing a women veteran support group. I had gone to an event and I had listened to a young woman explain her journey from Iraq to military sexual trauma to coming back home and being unemployed. I hired her on the spot to be my spokesperson, my advocate for this program, and I created a women veteran support group that would create these tethered hubs to bring women veterans together to deal with the inconsistent support that was coming from the federal VA within the state of Illinois. I mean, I just couldn't believe that, the land of Lincoln and Grant and Tammy Duckworth as a senator and women veterans were, being groped at federal VA facilities and not being treated with dignity and respect. And that triggered memories of, losing a female veteran, a female soldier leader, Lieutenant Walker in Afghanistan, and that just really, upped the tone in conflict with the state agency that would normally be responsible for doing this. And I was like, look, I got 5 people on my team. You have 1,000 employees, and what we're doing, I'm willing to go ahead and bring you on board, and let's do this together. But again, it was, are you listening? Can you work? Can you build? And to me, it was more important to give Abby a voice to build her program and let it be decentralized, like how I like to do, than to micromanage it and let it grow. The other thing I realized after doing some study and research and traveling, there's 102 counties in the state of Illinois. It's ridiculous. And each county has a county government, and then some of them have veteran assistance commissions, and then the state of Illinois has a footprint for its veteran service officers. And so, there's 700,000 veterans. My organization is in charge of trying to collaborate and coordinate for all this. And we set up a call center that's available, and we decided to set it up in the Chicago Lighthouse of the Blind, and to get veterans that are visually impaired. Because if Sergeant LeClaire retired is in Elmhurst, Illinois, and he's struggling, he's got a landlord-tenant issue, and he calls my program, and he's whining about life. This Joe on the other end is like, hey, look, dude, I hear what you're saying, but I'm blind, okay? So calm down, all right? Let's equal this out. How bad is your life, all right? Now, let's figure out where you're at. Let's go ahead and, all right. So let's do this holistically. Let's do no wrong door approach. Let's go ahead and work through. And so that dynamic, that engagement would defang you who's coming in like, I'm the victim, I need help, to, okay, life ain't that bad. I'm talking to someone that, is using Braille. Okay, all right. And then the next thing you know it, you've got an anecdotal success story. And then you build that up over months. And the next thing you know it, in the year that I ran the program, we started getting larger space connection by bringing in these community programs to help the Sergeant Leclercs that were in distress in Elmhurst, Illinois, or down in Southern Illinois, etc. And in that, I realized that we had a problem with taking care of our elderly veterans. And I just kept seeing, all this stuff come out about, 22 push-ups a day, and, we got to do more, and I'm like, okay, who's doing anything about it? Who's done the research? And so we dug deep into it. We realized in the state of Illinois, angry white 7-year-old men and above who were out of the economy, who ate bad food and were obese and had diabetes, were more likely than not to go ahead and off themselves because they were just angry and they weren't getting the benefits they need. And the state of Illinois wasn't structured to support them. And I wanted to go after that. We went ahead and started establishing programs for our elderly veteran community. And I ended up meeting a World War II veteran, at the time was 94 years old. He said, Jaime, I need help setting up a nonprofit. I said, God bless you. You want to give back at your age after being in the Pacific as an infantryman and then a sailor and being on the Nimitz when Japan surrendered, and then you came back and you want to go ahead and honor the memory of your wife and start a nonprofit in Illinois. I'll help you, brother. So I ended up making him an honorary member of the board in the organization I was in, and then creating a program where, again, if this guy could go ahead and figure out how to give back to the community, and he what his program was to collect clothes and then organize them, clean them, and then give them out to the homeless. So that was, what he wanted to do, and we got him set up, and he was doing that, and got him on the board, and he started, really becoming an inspiration and helping a bunch of other kinds of similar programs. And so we were highlighting how we needed to take care of our elderly veteran population, and we were trying to establish metrics to see if the suicide rate would go down. And then the capstone was establishing what called veteran support communities. And that's where we went ahead and identified 17 hubs in the state of Illinois that had large employer bases that whooped shit about how they were hiring veterans and had this huge veteran employee base, but they weren't doing anything else for the community. And they really didn't have that many veterans. And so I used, the shame tactic to go ahead and knock on doors and say, hey, look, what if we created a central hub? Maybe it's an American Legion, maybe it's an Order of the Purple Heart, maybe it's some other mom and pop, and they become the hub. They're tied into my call center at the Foundation for the Blind, and you guys fund it because you have a lot of money, and you guys are saying every Veterans Day and every Memorial Day how great of Americans you guys are, and we'll go ahead and provide community solutions for the problem set for veterans: homelessness, employment, substance abuse, counseling, training, certificate training, all sorts of programs. And that program would be more supportive than the state of Illinois Department of Veteran Affairs, etc. And so we launched that. It goes back to communication. It goes back to identity, because at some point the word had gotten out that we needed to elevate this kind of a concept and support, and I'd become the subject matter expert and the state leader in advocacy. And I've been asked to join the administration as the secretary for VA, or the director of VA. And my reform minded and my approach, the wolves came out, and I wasn't going to get political support for my nomination, and I was going to cause a distraction to the good governor who had appointed me, and I stepped away. And I stepped away and realized that I was no longer thriving in Illinois, and I could no longer, bend that curve toward supporting veterans, and that I was not doing well mentally. In fact, when I stepped away, I had a pretty serious suicidal ideation. Listened to Better Reason and The Blessing of Life, and stepped away from that platform. Took a long walk, stayed in my home at the time in Downers Grove for about a week, 2 weeks. Traveled to go see John Palucci, who was, in Massachusetts still. Flew out there and he lent me his car, and I drove around New Hampshire for a while. And I said, "All right, I'll be back." And then I flew back to Illinois, and by this time, my son was off doing his thing, my daughter was off doing her thing, and so I packed up and I moved to New Hampshire. And then I started working in the private sector for an Army friend, and his business collapsed during COVID. And then I transitioned over to the public sector again. And I'd gained an interest in climate change. I'd gained an interest in the environmental harms, and so I decided to become an environmental law attorney. And I walked my way into a position where there was a gap, and I met the secretary for, Department of Environmental Services, and I said, "I understand you're a retired Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force." Yeah. So I told him my story, and I said, "Let me join your team," and he hired me. So then I started handling the legal account for the department. And in order to survive through COVID, I had to do, things other than sit around and look at the Netflix account. So I started getting out and about, and I started volunteering at a farm that was a regenerative farm, and learned how to farm. And started putting food to table, and started pushing out, food product to the community. And then I also stumbled on an alpaca herd. It was like 8 miles from where I lived, and started helping with this alpaca herd. And I was connecting back to my cultural roots. And then I was also doing farming and giving back to the community.
Yeah. So the synchronization between a lot of those different VA entities that you started to see over all those years is there's a lot of people, great Americans, trying to do a lot of things for our veterans. And how do we get it synchronized through the communities so that we can get some tangible things? So it's not a lot of energy, hundreds of organizations, hundreds of counties, everybody's trying their best to do something for their veterans. But what you advocating for is a synchronization of those things, and a synchronization of place in the community that's hubbed out to somewhere inside the state, and moving veterans to their homes, their home of record or their state. Do you talk that piece a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So two things. 16.2 million Americans served during World War II in multiple services in 2 theaters. And as they started to come home in 43, 44, and 45, the Chief of Staff Marshal asked Omar Bradley and others to take a hold of the Department of Veteran Affairs, which was smaller at the time and was reacting to the World War I veteran community, and figure out how to provide support as they came home. And then there was legislation in 1944 that established the GI Bill, and also a small business loan and or the home VA guarantee loan. So those 3 programs, you had one of the 3 to pick, and you came home, and because there was a community hub, and at that time it was the it was the American Legion and the VFW, etc., that, Uncle Charlie that came home from, say, Tarawa, who couldn't behave at the Thanksgiving meal, he was sent to the local American Legion to be taken care of, and that's how he was taken care of, right? But everyone else would integrate, and we all have stories of friends that their grandfather passed, and they were going through their stuff, and they found a Foot Locker, and there's a silver star, and there's a Japanese flag, and the citation that they wouldn't known about because they were humble, because they came back, they saw their duty, and they integrated back within the community. And fast forward, the Vietnam era generation, they did not have the welcome home, and they struggled with, toxin exposures in Agent Orange. And it wasn't until the early 80s, almost 10, 15 years of fighting the federal government to get recognized for presumptive nature of Agent Orange. After the Gulf War, within 18 months, we had Gulf War presumption, we had Gulf War syndrome. And then now, today's world, what you have is, 3 federal agencies that are under regulation, the Federal Code of Regulations. The Department of Defense is Title 10. The Department of VA is Title 32. and the National Guard Reserves is Title 38, right? So 10, 32, and 38. And one would think, and the public would think, that all three of those are synchronized like a giant Venn diagram. They're coordinated, and they're good to go. But in reality, they're not. Why? Because young Captain Martinez went ahead and separated administratively some bad behavior private and sent him home with a less than honorable discharge, not knowing and believing that he would fall into the VA and be taken care of. But in reality, what I did was I basically gave him a death sentence. That he would go back home, he would lose his identity, he would not be able to go ahead and get a job. He didn't have 214 to go ahead and say honorable service. He didn't get education benefits, and he didn't go into the VA for any health care. He's homeless, he's committed petty crime, and he'll die in the streets. And no one explains that. And that's a way that we don't understand the integration of 10 to 38. And that's on the active duty side. You can Google up and say, medical record transition digital, and see what happens between the Department of Defense and the VA. And full-bird Colonel LeClaire's medical records still do not automatically transfer and have availability in Title 32 in the Department of the VA. And so when you retire, whenever that's going to be, and you want your medical records, you're going to have to do the due diligence to secure those, to make sure you have those when you come over to the VA, versus going to the VA and saying, hey, can I get all my medical records from when I served? That still hasn't happened yet. Those are just two unique examples of Title 10 not coordinating with Title 38 or 32. 38, you and I both know, every time we've gone down range, we've always had enablers and warfighters support us, either a battalion, a company, or some stand-in from the reserves and National Guard that have come on board. And they've been Title 10 under those orders. And so if they get hurt or they get exposed to a toxin when they go back to Nebraska, they should be able to go ahead and file a claim and get their benefits taken care of. But because those medical records and because the witness statements are from some active duty unit, then Smith, who's in the Nebraska National Guard, isn't going to be able to file that claim, and he'll die on the vine without access to his benefits. I can go on and on with how the synchronization doesn't work. And that's where the problem set is. How do you get these silos to integrate into a Venn diagram? If we understand the reality of politics and the administrations and the labels and political parties, you'll get one administration that has one view of how to handle their agencies, and then it'll change out after one or two terms, so you'll never get done. So what should be the solution? Well, a model that I propose is through the Community and Community Hub, and it's a program that I'm working on, and that's an end state. But in regards to your question, all these good-willed Americans, equine therapy for veterans, engineering design firms that will make prosthetics last longer and donate it, bringing World War II veterans and Korean veterans to Washington, D.C. to do a glory flight so they can see the memorials and have one day of being taken care of and recognized for their service, All these kind of mom and pop shops, all of them are out there, but there's no way to synchronize and to synergize them, But if you can create a model and use that model to develop, a series of growth models in time, you'll take that anecdotal experience and then create enough data so that there'll be a change in the dynamics of these problems that we have with Title 10, 32, and 38. So I'll give you an example of what I'm trying to do in how I ended up in Colorado, and what I'm doing now with, the question of what do you do with the gift of life, right? So in 2017, my siblings and kids, we flew to Peru to spend time with my mother for her 80th birthday. We surprised her. We had a great party in Lima, and then the next day we took off for Cusco, and we went from Cusco into Sacred Valley, into Machu Picchu. And then we all hiked and climbed Machu Picchu, and we had a very emotional and spiritual family experience. And while that was going on, I was in a completely different space. I was in an altered state of reality. From the moment that I got off the plane in Cusco, and got from Cusco by by van to Aliantantama, which is the halfway point in the Sacred Valley, to pick up a train, take the train from the valley all the way to the foot of Machu Picchu in a town called Agua Calientes, Hot Waters. I was completely taken back to being in Afghanistan. Why? Because I was going through what's known as geographic displacement, and I was re-triggering my trauma. And I realized that the Sacred Valley looked just like the Hindu Kush, and everything that was in Nangalam and Nangarhar and everything that's in the Korangal and everything that's up there. And I realized that I was going through some metamorphosis, and that what I had experienced in Afghanistan, or what troops had experienced in Afghanistan, and what was best in the book called The Hardest Place, it tells the story of the Korangal, was that there was a distinct tribal Korangali set of attributes and cultural norms, and they spoke a different dialect, indigenous dialect, but there they wanted to kill you. In Peru, in the Sacred Valley, the indigenous community still exists. They speak Quechuan, which is the ancient Incan language, and they're trying to heal you. And so I said, okay, so how can that be? Let me explore this some more. So I spent 17, 18, 19, and 20, and then 21, 4 or 5 years trying to go through and trying to understand that. And then I returned to the valley on my own in May of 22. Spent about 4 weeks in there. And the concept was integrate and do altitude, cultural integration in Cusco, and work your way in the valley. And with a team of support, you go and spend 2 to 3 days with a village where they are speaking Quechuan, but they're trying to heal you, and you're doing whatever they're doing. So if they're farming, they're seeding, they're harvesting, they're walking the alpacas, you're doing that. You are displacing your trauma. You are burying your trauma. You are learning to understand that hate bucket doesn't need to exist. And then from there, we get together, Alitantambo, and then we hike the Sacred Valley Inca Trail, sunrise on Machu Picchu, go through that, come back, recuperate. There's some baths, go through some hot springs, work with your mental health provider there, and then get back to Lima. From Lima, put a wreath at their Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and then go back home. So Smith from Nebraska, and Jones is from San Diego, and so on. So the cohort would have 15 from all over the states. We have a team on the ground. We have a team that goes with them. 12-day cycle, 1 day travel there, 1 day travel back, 10 days on the ground. Now they come back and they go back to Nebraska, San Diego, etc. Once a year, the arms room opens up and they have to report back to the collaborative farm here in Boulder. And they spend, a long weekend, either harvesting, planting, or working with the alpacas. And those products, the produce goes back into the community for the food insecure community, which we have. And then the wool goes to the mill and gets into the textile hubs, and then that comes out as scarves, hats, and gloves. And those go back to homeless veteran communities. So that's the concept, that's the cycle. And I proofed the lane, and I figured out that we can do this. The beauty of the program is that anecdotally, if I get 3 cohorts to do this a year, that's 45. I do it for 3 years. I have over 100. If over 100 veterans participate in the 3-year cycle, I no longer have anecdotal, I have data. Of that data, I guarantee you that more than 50% are going to want grants from the foundation to start their own little community hub. Omaha, San Diego, Seattle, Portland, Peoria, Illinois, Montgomery, Alabama. And so now they have their ability to stand up their hub, and they're tied into it. And so this concept grows where those community hubs are now bringing together those resources for those other programs that I talked about. So, while long-winded, that's the concept. And what I'm hoping to do as I continue to work at the corporate level is build this program while I fight cancer and deal with my mental health challenges, and come out and be able to answer that question on the back end, which is what do you do with the gift of life? And for me, it's going to be to continue to be honest with myself, to build better relationships, and to build this program so that we start the process. And the other thing I would tell you is, take a look on LinkedIn and look at all the people that we're connected to, and all the ones that are military retired. God bless them all. But a lot of them will remind us of the fallen. They'll go ahead and say, I remember Fallujah, and we lost this guy, and we lost that. And God bless that, and I think that's great. But what else are they doing? Where are they moving in the formation to go ahead and do veteran advocacy and helping that community out? And that's where I want to go ahead and try to recruit and get those former commanders to help out. I know that I can reach back into the Rolodex of former battalion and brigade commanders that fought in the Corps, and I'll go, okay, who's struggling out there? And they'll tell you. I mean, or I can, continue to work with Sebastian Younger and have more veteran town hall meetings once a year. But we've got to figure out, if not through my model, other models on how to bring those fusion points together on Title 10, Title 32, and Title 38, because we owe it. Because at the end of the day, we haven't done much to reduce the suicide rate, 20 to 22 a day, or the homelessness rate. And now it's even worse because it's politicized. And that's the problem set.
That was beautiful. That was a real good rundown. The thing I want to kind of follow up with that on is when I hear you speak that, Jaime, I think of, at a much lower level, we think of train the trainer. We think of teaching folks how to go out and lead and leadership, right? And so when you were talking about your program and the program that you're in today, right, that you're starting to develop, you're training the trainer about what type of leadership those community hubs are going to need. And you're saying this is how we would do it. And so that then we can send those leaders out to the communities. Can you go into a little bit of the idea of the community hubs and the idea behind the folks that would separate from the military, whether they're lieutenant colonels or sergeant majors, 04s, 05s, 05s, 06s, and as the idea of when they retire at the 20-year mark, but go out to their community and serve for an additional 2 years, 2 to 3 years. Could you talk through that process?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Right. Some other policy prescriptions that I recommend. Recently, there was a report that was issued, and they recognized a few of the things that I've been trying to advocate for a few years. The first one is a pilot program that would allow a passed over lieutenant colonel who's not going to make brigade command or 06 at 23 years, an opportunity to serve for 3 more years, not in uniform, but in Title 32, but earning Title 10 pay so that his or hers retirement is at 26 years. They would go back to Omaha, let's say. I always pick on Nebraska, but anyway, maybe it's the stakes, which I don't need anymore. But let's just say they go back, and their home of record is in Nebraska, and they go back, and there's a VA facility there. And we all know that in the spirit of the greatest generation, that we're not replicating that model. We're not building a VA that was run by post-World War II veterans. We have a generation of post 9/11 veterans that have come back and have ping-ponged through different organizations to get the care, and we haven't affected it. So one of the biggest challenges that the VA has is leadership. Now, there's some well-intentioned political appointees and great people there, and I know a lot of them. But at the user-friendly level, down at the CBOC level, down at the hospital level, down at the clinic level, we just don't have the leadership. What we need to do is ask Congress to create a pilot program for a 3-year period and send 100 E89 retirees and 05, 06 retirees back to the home of record, and their duty station is at the VA. Now, they don't have to know, how to treat trauma, and they don't have to know how to, make sure that, the supplies get there or how to manage a building per se. What they need to do is lead. They need to get on the ground. They need to own it. We need to own the veteran community. It was our decision as senior leaders to send them downrange, to give them the orders that they executed that ended up in their grievous wounds and their mental health problems and in their silent wounds. And I think that if we were to populate every state with 2 teams over a 3-year period, that the metrics would show of those 100 facilities, that the leadership metrics that they have, the return for investment, would go through the roof. I know it would. Because it would have done for me if they would have said, hey, Jaime, look, you can't serve an active duty. You're infantry. We can't deploy you anymore. You need too much help. But you know what? We're going to send you back. We're going to send you back to Illinois. We're going to send you back to Chicago. And you're going to go to Jesse Brown, VA. And you're going to be the, active duty advisor to the leadership there. You're going to go to school for 3 months. You're going to get certified in VA lingo. And you're going to serve there for 3 years. So instead of the 26 that you had, you're going to have 29. And then at the end, you may compete for an SES position, and then you may be able to help the VA. And I would have took that on. I wouldn't have lost my identity. I would have had a sergeant major, a first sergeant that was coming back with me, and any other services, and we would have took it on, and we would have connected with the other pair that's somewhere in Illinois, and then we would have done that moving forward. And we would have done stuff like, if a female veteran is coming here and she's afraid to come into this facility, and or there's not enough, female-related medical specialists or gynecologists or any of the stuff, which there's not, or there's no way to provide any kind of daycare for children, which they need to go to the appointments, or they need whatever, we would have recognized that. We would have taken pride and we would have said, no, that's not going to happen in our facility. If you're a grumpy veteran from Vietnam and you're going to sit there in line in a room and some female veteran sits next to you, you're going to comport yourself like a gentleman. You're going to treat them like dignity, with dignity and respect. But see, that's not happening. So we don't have that. So we don't have a dedicated transition for a pilot program that would take senior leaders from the military who caused the problems that veterans have and hold them accountable to go ahead and serve. And they would do that. Another program that, I kind of touched on, and one of the things that I found out in the homeless community is, to the T, everyone had bad paper. What is bad paper? Bad paper is a less than honorable discharge, a DD-214 that says, hey, thanks for your service, but you're not going to get any benefits on the backside. So we send them home and they become a statistic. And we all just, say, oh, another statistics. And, we put a Facebook video out. We do 22 push-ups and we think we've helped the system. We haven't. Because young Captain LeClaire should know that he has an option. Because maybe Smith, who has a deployment and 2 JRTCs under his belt, just because,
Yeah, I know where you're going with this one. I love this.
Yeah, just because someone stumbles, and loses their way doesn't mean that they're lost forever, And so you've got, a 23-year-old that screwed up, popped hot, isn't able to go ahead and continue, but he's got a V device on an RCOM and he's got a Purple Heart, but you got to go ahead and separate them. And you don't have any other options. But imagine if you had an option where you can go ahead and say, hey, look, Smith, I'm going to put you in to qualify for a transitional DD-214. You're going to go back home to Iowa, and you're going to enroll in Veteran Treatment Court, and you're going to be in that program for 2 years. And you're going to meet all these metrics. And if at the end of that time frame you complete everything, you're going to get a DD-214 with an honorable discharge and the asterisk. Now, that isn't going to give you 100% like everybody else that had honorable service, but it's going to give you a pathway. You may not get a 4-year degree, but you can get a 2-year associate. You can go ahead and get your health care that you qualify for, and you can be proud of your service. And if we were to do that as a pilot program and allow, 3 bases to run that, a Navy base, Air Force, and one of each service, and integrate that with Title 38 and 32, you would have impact, and you'd have less homelessness, and your suicide rate would go down. What we're doing with SHARP and what we're doing with military sexual trauma, and what we're doing with the pathway for both women and men that suffer through that indignity and that mistreatment, they're not landing at new units, and they're not landing in their community with their dignity restored. And there's got to be, I think, another way to go ahead and get that soft landing and that open door approach, so that those individuals that have suffered can have a life of dignity and respect, and they can be welcomed home as equals. And that's not happening. And that would also be some other kind of pilot, led by those that have suffered from that, to go ahead. And it's not so much about the accountability, because that's a separate thing for good order and discipline, but it has to be at that base level, and then down at the community level, where they have a platform, and they have the opportunity to come back home. Because I think we're missing a boat there in a grievous way, and all we're going to do is recreate that trauma for them in the back end, and we need to fix that problem.
You've given us so many positive examples of things that are either already happening in the process of becoming pilot programs and are possibilities in the future. For a lot of folks, whether they're folks like me who are, I have less daylight in front of me than I do behind me, but I also know there's a lot of people listening right now that are just getting started. Can you give a little bit of advice on folks like me who have the ability to still influence things inside the military? And then a little bit of advice for the folks that are just getting on board with how we can do some of these things. Because I might not be able to recommend that somebody go back to their community and get that transitional separation, that asterisk on their 214 yet. But there are things that I can be doing while I'm on active duty as a senior leader. And then there's things that our younger leaders can be doing on active duty. Can you give some advice on how we can kind of approach that?
Yeah, sure, and thank you. For my foxhole, I would just say that be it an E2 that's coming on board that may happen that for staff duty have to listen to something like this, to a senior leader that's driving from point A to point B to attend a senior non-commissioned officer school or whatever, and listen to this. I think at the end of the day, it goes down to self accountability. Step one is always hold yourself accountable. And if you don't know how, find mentors to do so. You're going to make mistakes. What happens is I heard from a previous podcast that you had done, Colonel, where you had described how soldiers that enlisted and try to go to the Ranger option and don't make it through get then sent to another unit, and then they're in that other unit. And the first thing that they deal with in the military is that they've already, kind of let themselves down, their communities down, and they're already got the shame bucket going, right? So, I understand that concept, and obviously from my story. What you shared in that other episode was, that you serve as, a mentor. I don't know if the listener or younger soldiers understand about self-accountability and mentorship and finding someone that they can talk to. Not so much the open door, but working with, someone that can help them get their bootstraps back on and then move forward. And that goes into move forward, which is self-development. No matter where you are in the spectrum, it's all about self-development. You shared previously in another podcast that your library increased in time when you realized that you had dedicated so much of the operational force that you had neglected that area, and now you're more of a student of art. You shared that, your bookshelf grew, and it wasn't just because you went to CGSC that you actually started, working on, the modalities and the holistic approach. And I would tell everyone that they have to have some holistic approach. And, someone very dear to me, set boundaries. And that's where I'm at right now, in that there's a holistic approach to working through trauma and or experiences. And that includes everything from meditation to grounding to journaling to cardio to yoga to shared group exercises, anything for self-development outside of okay, yeah, I want to go from E4 to E5. I want to understand, if I'm an IT guy, how to code better. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. No, that's natural. That's going to happen. We're talking about self-development holistically, which someone that grows up culturally may never have had that if they're from West Virginia or from New York City. It doesn't really matter. They may never have been told that. So they need to approach that. The other thing is, going back to the concept of reading the room and listening and communicating. And then something that we shared separately in between our break that we haven't added to the dialogue, but for the audience, I would tell you that it's called buffering, or understanding your role in the organization of where you're at. So if you are, a team leader, it's your job to keep those three soldiers focused on what you tell them and keeping them to the moment versus any gossip that's going on with the first platoon and they're in third platoon. And it's the first sergeant's job to buffer the platoon sergeants and the rest of the company from things that he's hearing or knows about going on in a sister company or in a battalion or sister battalion because they have a bunch of indiscipline. And it's your job as an executive officer or as a battalion commander to shield your battalion from the brigade. So there's this concept of buffering that no one really tells you about until you have a leader that shares and demonstrates that to you. And I would tell you that that's also part of the toolkit. So it's about self-accountability, mentorship, self-development, listening, learning how to communicate, watching your tone and tenor, reading the room, and then buffering. And I think that capsule, that multivitamin there, if you take that, will apply when you transition. So to the second part of your question, when you transition, had someone helped me understand what I was already doing while I was in the service, which you and I, discussed before we even did this podcast about how you and I know each other, and the lessons that we've learned from one another. If someone had said, "Hey, Colonel Martinez, thank you for your service, but we're going to go ahead and sit you down and teach you not so much this transition assistant program, which ain't worth crap, but to understand this, and here's your scorecard. Here's your way that you integrate back. Here are the tools that you're going to need." If someone would have told me that, I would have been able to better align myself for understanding the trauma that I went through and not taking my blanket of trauma and covering all the ones that I loved with that and saying, "Oh, share this with me." No, that's not what you do. Instead, what you do is, you confront with fear, the fear that you have. You work through that fear, because if you don't, that is going to impact your physiological self in so many different ways. And you have to look at it as some like catharsis. You don't need trauma to be like a phoenix or a caterpillar to come out as a butterfly. But you are going to be like that when you come out of the service, no matter what. From a 3-year stint to a 26-year stint, whatever is a sergeant or a 4-star general. Because I've been in touch with a 4-star general when I ask him how he's doing, and he's not doing very well because he doesn't understand what it's like because he feels like he lost his identity. So it'll happen. And so this trauma bucket that we carry from service, and I will tell you, I have a very, very good friend who rose up to the highest ranks of the Chicago Fire Department. And he left the fire department and is now helping train. And one of the biggest challenges he has is the high mental health and suicide rate of the fire department personnel, because of the trauma that they have going into a building and bringing out charred babies, and or showing up at a head-on collision and realizing that they're not going to go ahead and be able to save that cheerleader's life, and how they carry that and how that destroys the relationships, and how for them it's like macho to go back to the station and report for duty the next day, right? Every profession has this problem with trauma. The medical providers during COVID, they had it. School teachers, they have it. Administrators, business people, everyone has trauma. And what everyone is afraid to do is confront that and seek out the tools that they need. And for us and for our audience, I would mention that I'm not providing all the answers. I'm just sharing my experience and what I'm going to try to do here as I continue to battle this insidious disease and then come out for the sunny days that await me.
What I hear loud and clear is leadership in that transition out of the military. The folks that are listening to this podcast are a majority going to be people that are successful, have been successful, and will be successful in life or in the military. The folks that need our help the most are the people with challenges, the people with substance abuse, the people that are homeless. They are all the people that will never listen to this podcast. Those are the people that we need to lead. Those are the people that we need to help. Those are the people that need our coaching, our demonstration, our no days off approach to being the example and helping them get through these processes. Advice for the folks that are going to be leading the way, whether they're just getting started or they're getting out of the military tomorrow, and or they recently did get out of the military, and they're taking this leadership, this no days off approach towards helping people on the outside have a better life.
Thank you. Two things as capstones. One, the concept of social contract, the obligation that we swear to the oath, both as commissioned officers, not commissioned officers, and even the oath of enlistment. And it's not political, and it's not about foreign and domestic and whatever you hear in the news. It's really an obligation that carries on within the social contract. And so we, even from the days of Locke with an E, and the ways in which, our founders went ahead and figured out what the social basket is supposed to be in a social contract, we raise our hands and we give an oath and we serve. And there's an obligation by, our government to take care of us. And 9 times out of 10, as well as people are good intention in those political stripes, there's a pathway to get the support that you need within the social contract. But many times the social contract has been rendered ineffective. The lines are blurry and it's been ripped up. And now, that context helps with the answer to your question, which is what can someone do who's actually listening? Because the majority of the audience that needs to listen to this will never listen to this. I would just say that, everyone has a right to pursue their post-service obligations how they want to. And I wish them the best. And I wish them, the support that they need within their family or their community or within their mentors program to deal with all of the trauma and obstacles that they may have had. But at some point, when they believe that they have gotten themselves in a good transition, they platformed, that they reach out and they source through and they start building a community network to go ahead and figure out what that community needs for those that are struggling. Unfortunately, we don't have the societal norms like the post-World War II generation that I explained does. Here we're on our phones. I mean, you drive and you're in an intersection, you turn to the right, and there's a family of 6 in a van, and all 4 kids are on a tablet, and the parents aren't even talking, and even the driver's on a phone, and it's just ridiculous. So we're so completely disconnected. My approach would be to connect. My approach is to get out there and start taking responsibility for your actions as a leader that created some of the problems that are down there. Once I think you have that internal conversation, you'll find a pathway to figure out how you can contribute. I know a lot of people that volunteer on their own to do great things, and I think that's great. And I encourage that, and I'm proud of them, and I'm honored to know them. But at the same time, I know a lot of people that they just won't. They'll go fund me or whatever. And I think that we have a moral obligation as uniformed leaders, leading any of the services, to get out there and do more than seek the bottom line, and do more than, try to transition and just take care of themselves. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. What I'm saying is that, in today's world, the numbers of people serving is less and less. So the World War II generation is dying off, and the Korean War generation, and then the Vietnam generation. So that when we're 85, there's not that many of us left. There's a huge military-civilian divide. So if the ones that are coming out, and we get a percentage of, say, 17%, if they follow the concept of a social contract and their obligation to go back and stitch up the community, then I think we'll be successful. I think that this will allow people to be able to face the mirror and confront their own trauma while helping out the community.
Yeah. So Jaime, as we want to kind of start to get ready to land this plane, there's a couple things that I want to kind of go over. I want to go through them, relatively quickly, just because I want to get them all in. The first thing I want to kind of start off with is, your advice for battalion commanders, command teams, command sergeant majors, as with your experience, the things that you've seen both with trauma, being in command yourself.
No, thank you. I mean, I've thought about the privilege of leadership and the privilege of command, and the team that, at least in the military, especially in the Army, in combat arms, you're going to find yourself with a senior enlisted partner, be it as a platoon leader, platoon sergeant, company commander, first sergeant, and so on. We all know those dynamics. And at the end of the day, I think what you have to recognize is that you have an obligation to provide a sense of purpose and the obligation for readiness, while at the same time creating a balance for the quality of life that each soldier and leader deserves, treating those with dignity and respect while understanding all the pressures that senior level command may have on you. That becomes a challenge, and it did for me when I was selected at the capstone of my tenure while I was going through a double diagnosis of cancer. And after finding the internal drive to do both at the same time. For me, I had an opportunity to lead a unit that had to balance its professional decorum with its tactical skill at the National Cemetery, both in ceremonies and then response to defense of the National Capital Region. And in my particular unit, having a tactical setting because of the deployment requirements that we embraced. And during that time frame, what could happen is senior leaders may, the 3-star to the 2-star, the 2-star to the 1-star, the 1-star to the brigade commander, down to you, the battalion commander, and or you to the company commander, is that the same thing is happening in the enlisted chain of support. And so there are all sorts of stories about overreaction and how the penalty has to be imposed against the many. You'll have formations on a Saturday morning because someone did something stupid on a Friday night and so on. And then I think the best way to approach that is that you need to look at the organization as an entity. So if you have 935 soldiers and 2 screw up over the weekend, you have 933 that did not. And that's where your focus should be. You should not lose your Monday trying to repair the egregious behaviors of 2 over the weekend. And I learned that early on because we didn't have those kinds of reactions when I was growing up as a young enlisted and then as a junior officer. So I would share that with anyone that has, that leadership responsibility, is to build a sense of accountability. And if it's a shared responsibility, that's one thing. But if it's an individual one, hold those people accountable. You can't allow the notion of paragon of virtue, right, where everyone's going to be held to this high standard because the public is looking at you. At the end of the day, soldiers stumble, people stumble, and they lose their way. But it doesn't mean that they're lost. And it kind of goes to, the administrative discharge issue that we've talked about and some of the tools that are available for that. Kind of set back to the question, because what I experienced in, the 80s and the 90s and by the time I was medically retired in 2010 is so much different than what the leadership is dealing with today and the challenges and the reform that's needed to be prepared for a near-peer threat, while at the same time handling all the other kinds of extremist threats that we have. And so my hand is together in a strong clap for the leaders at every level in what they're facing with. And so I think it's just about where do you value the principle of shared leadership with your entire team, and don't become distracted by the pressures of higher command because they're more worried about what the unit looks like versus you being worried about protecting those good actors while holding those accountable that need to be held accountable. On the last end of it, someone might ask you, what's your proudest moment? Or, what do you want to take away? And, I think that in a few of your previous podcasts, you've related where you have run into someone that was a sergeant and now they're a first sergeant, or they were company commander and now they're brigade commander. And I think we all are privileged to be in an institution or serve in an institution where that happens. I will talk to people that serve in the Air Force, the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marines, and the Army, and everyone has a story about how one of their privates is now, the commanding general, right? And I'm just extremely proud of, the opportunity that I spent with the Class A team from the 82nd 1st Brigade that ended up, the commander retired as a 3-star, the DCO is a 3-star in active duty, the S1's a G1, the S2 is now a 3-star, the S3 is a 2-star, and one of our lieutenants is a governor. I pride myself in having contributed and or being able to serve amongst giants, and that's great. But at the same time, I would say that as a young sergeant, one of my proudest moments was being with that little band of paratroopers that got together at a drop zone and went from point A to point B to accomplish the mission, or fought in the desert together. So it's a wide spectrum of pride. And I got a LinkedIn message a couple years ago, and it was from Conley. PFC Conley was my driver, and he's like, "Sir, I found you on LinkedIn. I don't know if you remember me, but you were one crazy bastard, and I learned so much." And he's a CEO of this huge company, I'm just so proud of him, and so, for those that are out there listening, you may never know what your contribution is going to be to someone. Hold yourself accountable. If you work on self-development, if you, find mentorship, if you figure out a way to mix a bunch of modalities to make yourself better, you're going to make an impact. And that's really important.
So, hey, as we kind of go into our closing here and wrap things up, can you talk a little bit about what's next for you? Like what's on the horizon over the next few months, few years? A little bit about Stoic Alpaca, and how does this get after what we started this whole thing off with, which was, what do you do with the gift of life?
Yeah. Well, I would tell you that's where I'm at right now. I have a medical crisis that if I do the rinse and repeat, well, I'll have a good outcome medically. I may not holistically approach how to answer the question of what do you do with the gift of life. So I think it's twofold. In the first instance, I'm facing some more intensive treatments over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then an evaluation to see if I'm cancer free. Part of that process is whether or not I've built a foundation for my mental health that I didn't approach or look at the first time that I went through. The circumstances are significantly different. At the time of my double diagnosis in 2009, a surprise mentor show up on a platform to motivate me. I had, the chief of staff and the vice chief of staff of the Army that were interested in they actually sent the chief of chaplains to my bedside so that when I woke up from my surgeries that he was there. I had all sorts of senior leaders supporting me. I had a family network and a tribe, both here in the States and in Peru. I had a neighborhood that would be bringing, meals to our family. My children were younger, and so we protected them from some of this and didn't allow that to filter in. So it was a whole set of different circumstances. Here, I find myself, I've been humbled at the leadership at the company that I work for, Bird on America, that has given me the opportunity to work remote and to focus on my health while I also am contributing to their program, and that's been really important to maintain that professional acumen. None of that would matter if I didn't figure out a way to finally confront and look in the mirror and say, I've got some issues mentally, in the sense of being able to address years and years of trauma and years of not being able to work through those issues. And so I immediately approached the diagnosis with the realization that I was going to have to confront this on my own, even though, my family and my children have been supportive. I didn't really let them in on this until I had a clear medical pathway to how I was going to go ahead and get cancer free, not being partnered and not having the support that I need. In that regard, I just decided to confront that. I've been able to, in that, do the parallel review of what I think the program Stoic Alpacas Forward Bound should be. I think at the end of the day, you have to identify what is trauma. And trauma really is an overwhelming life event, or maybe it's a single event. For those, may have experienced violent combat. There's fear and there's helplessness. You may have had betrayal by the system, by your leadership. You may have suffered through military sexual trauma, harassment. It basically disrupts your sense of trust and safety in the world. So I've taken an approach to identify my trauma, to accept it in a way, to think it in a way. I know that sounds a little, odd, but, it's like going, okay, I think I understand this. And then I need to find, and you need to find, the trust in yourself that you have what you need inside to heal. You're going to have to transform and figure out how to remove what doesn't belong and allow to release it. And then you have to take back your power. You have to rise up above it. You have to figure out how to forgive the cause, the sources, and then ultimately yourself. And that's what keeps the pain at bay. When you're traumatized, you disconnect from yourself. You lose your authentic self, and you do that to survive. And so in your inner turmoil, you operate with fear, depression, and avoidance. You self-medicate. You do all sorts of things to not confront it. Behaviors, you're not able to communicate in your relationships. There's all sorts of things that happen. But at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to open that door to heal. You want to accept the trauma. That's your first step. And you want to foster some kind of internal safety net for yourself, because that's going to restore your individual responsibility and acceptance. And that's going to allow you to believe in self-compassion. You have to have self-compassion. And oftentimes you carry this, you go into a room, you turn on the chandelier of guilt. It's a term that I've kind of bounced around for myself. You just turn that light on, and that chandelier of guilt is swinging around, and it's lighting everything up, and it doesn't allow you to kind of really, find a furniture to sit and relax. And so what Stoic is trying to do is to explore, and what we're going to do in this pilot is we're going to explore a way for you to personally have an element of forward bound, right? Get forward of this, bound forward, And so what the program does is basically allows you to witness the trauma, where you try to relive it, with professionals there, and or with a shared experience with veterans there in the Sacred Valley. You have to have a corrective experience, right? So if you are selected for the program and you need this kind of a program to rebalance yourself and regain your trauma experience, while it's very discomforting, you're going to experience it, and you're going to have an opposite reaction to the trauma. So if you fought in the Korengal and you had those, cultural and ethnic issues there, and those were not accepted to you because of the language and the fact that they wanted to kill you in the Sacred Valley, they're gonna try to heal you. And by reliving that geographic exposure, that replacement of that experience, you're going to reverse it, and that's where the geographic displacement therapy comes in. And then that's going to help you release the trauma. And you have to learn how to release it once you relive it. And so there are great modalities by the VA and other practitioners. I'm just trying to go outside of the scope because I think it's important to reform and look at different things that are not just simply in the DSMB. And we're already starting to see all sorts of different things that are happening with VRs and different platforms, and you're missing the experience or the shared experience. And so through community engagement on the ground, by working with local communities there in the Sacred Valley, and then when you come back home, what you're doing is you are restoring your confidence in yourself. You have taken ownership and you're giving back, because I think that's what's important. And then when you come back to the farm here in Boulder or anywhere else where we set this program up, you're going to have triggers again, and it's going to be an opportunity for you to come back here and work with the herd and work with the regenerative farming program and give back. So two-step, I'm going to get through what I need to get through. I'm going to continue to heal my mental health, and I'm going to get through the physical challenges that I have. I'll continue to probably lose some weight and lose my hair, but I'll be on the pathway back here shortly. Going to continue to work for my corporate team, but I'm going to be spending a lot of time on weekends and in the evenings trying to build this program. I have some writing opportunities that I'm going to explore, and I'm hoping that through that I answer the question of what do you do with the gift of life. Well, I'm proud of the pathway that unfolded post 2010 coming back home, in the sense of the accomplishments that me and the teams that I was involved with did with improving the quality of life for veterans in the state of Illinois and in New Hampshire and elsewhere. I'm not particularly proud of some of the behaviors and some of the actions that unfolded during that 10 to 13 years. And I want to make sure that looking forward that I find a different pathway to being able to look in the mirror and learn to love myself and forgive myself. So long answer, but that's where I'm at, Colonel.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing so much of your story. Thanks so much for opening up. Thanks for sharing so much intimate information about your medical and your experiences that you've had over the time. What we'll do is we'll share as much of this on our social media platforms. We'll share your LinkedIn. We'll put a lot of the ways that you can get a hold of Jaime in the show notes and ways through our social media pages. If you need to get a hold of him, we will help connect. We'll help with that connection. We'll also help with with keeping people updated on how things are going over the next few months as we move forward. Because if there's one thing that you realize as you go through this, and as you serve in the military and as you serve in the Army, is that when you go through a crisis, when you have tough times, that you got friends, you got people, and you got relationships that you can count on. And here we are all these years later, that you can count on me, and we can count on each other when we have tough times like this. It's not just reaching out and saying, hey, I'm here, here's my phone number, and here's my email, let me know what I can do. It's actually going out and doing something.
Well, first of all, super thanks for everything in closing, and for reminding me earlier at the end of the day when I was 1P5XO and you were finishing up your platoon time and had an opportunity to go to the 75th. And I remember you reminded me that, I talked to you about how you had demonstrated outstanding leadership potential, and that the battalion needed you to go ahead and transition into being a line XO, which you did, and how we, deployed together and how we operated together. And I'm just very proud of all of your service, your dedication, your multiple deployments, the fights that you had to have, the great example of fatherhood and being a great dad and husband, and how you've, over the many years, have taken all of your experiences and led companies and led your battalion, and now you've got a new leadership opportunity here. Just super proud to have served with you, and I always got your six. If you need anything, don't ever hesitate to reach out. But what you're doing here on this podcast is really important. It's giving a voice. I'm hoping that you continue to be able to bring this voice and your leadership to a larger audience. But I also know that at some point, you're going to be focused on command and the things that you're going to need to do. But you're going to leave a legacy, and hopefully the other guests that have been on this show can walk away knowing that it's cathartic to share, and that it's important that the theme of leadership and accountability and responsibility is a Colonel Leclerc landmark and hallmark, and I'm really proud of you, so thank you.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts, and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes, and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world but keep the sky